Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode. Winter is absolutely on us. It's a really horrible day out there today, and our gazebo that we use to work underneath when we're doing all sorts of dusty and messy stuff, we have a gazebo outside, and that's literally just flown up into the air about 20 foot and landed on my Land Rover. So that's come in. It's broken, but there you go. And yeah, it's very, very horrible out there, but it's really, really good to welcome you to another episode. And today I'm delighted to welcome Liberty Watts to the show. So Liberty is a conservation architect and the founder of Liberty Rose Architects, bringing a wealth of experience to the world of heritage conservation. Amongst her achievements, Liberty was recognised as a 2023 King's Foundation 35 Under 35 award recipient and also holds the distinction of being a 2021 SPAB Scholar. Her commitment to preserving traditional craft skills and advancing heritage conservation education runs through everything she does. Liberty's practice encompasses a fascinating range of work from ecclesiastical projects to consultancy on listed buildings, museum and historic sites. She's also incredibly passionate about mentoring the next generation of conservation professionals. So I really hope you enjoy today's episode. Libby, absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Great. So, how did it start for you?
So I studied architecture at the Welsh School of Architecture at Cardiff, and it wasn't long into the course that we were designing office buildings, and I realised this was not me. Trying to maximize your footprint for your money and be most efficient was not where I wanted to go. So in my part one placement, I did a placement with a small practice in Marlow, and we weren't necessarily working on listed buildings primarily. It was just high-end residential, and that happened to have some listed buildings in it. And it was through this that I realised that working with existing buildings was where my passion lied, being out on site, understanding the materials. So then when I went back and did my master's, the module that I did was looking at vernacular materials. So this kind of led me into more historic buildings, conservation, that kind of area. And then when I finished my master's, I started working for Donald Insall Associates, a practice that works on some really incredible buildings. And I worked in the Birmingham office for 3 years. And Donald Insall was one of the first SPAB scholars. So at this point, I became aware of the SPAB and the scholarship and really thought this was something that I wanted to get into and put my mind to it. And that's what I was going to do.
Wow. And I didn't realise that Donald Insall was one of the first SPAB scholars.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know the exact date off the top of my head, but there was a couple of years before him. But obviously the war happened and that put a hold on the scholarship.
Yeah,
For
yeah,
many
yeah.
years it stopped. Yeah.
And then what happened shortly after that?
It was a bit of a strange time. It was COVID times. So I was awarded the SPAB scholarship and left Donald Insall Associates. And then the scholarship, a week before we started, was cancelled, which was a bit of a shock.
Uh,
And so I thought, what am I going to do with my year? And people
oh
started coming to
no.
me and asking me if I would work on their houses and projects. And a family friend in the village had a grade two listed. It was 8 cottages, and now it's been turned in the 80s into one. It was grade two listed, so they knew they needed to seek someone with knowledge in listed buildings. And that was kind of the start of Liberty Rose Architects. I thought, well, let's start a practice, knowing that I was then going to go on the scholarship in 2021. So putting my work on pause after a year during COVID, and then yeah, did the scholarship in 2021, which was an incredible experience. But what was great was when I'd finished the scholarship, I had my practice already set up and ready just to jump back into, and clients had waited for me But also I'd made a real network of people whilst on that year out, and had inquiries and things. So jumped into being quite busy actually.
So when you started your practice, am I right in saying that you didn't have a huge amount of experience, sort of hands-on, should I
No.
say, type of?
I'd been working at Insuls as sort of a project architect there, running projects. Um, but I hadn't done the scholarship yet, and I wasn't conservation accredited. But the the thing, what's different to me compared to a lot of, I say, people who work in conservation, is pretty much all my experience after my master's had been in listed buildings and historic buildings. And so,
Mm,
even though my experience was only was quite limited, it was all on really high-end projects of conservation style. So I think that was quite different when a lot of people start working in conservation. They might work on one or two listed buildings, whereas everything I did was a listed building, which is,
I see.
yeah. So yeah, it was, and then I did the SPAB scholarship, which really expands your, I think no matter how much knowledge and experience you have, it changes many of your ideas about things, and it really allows you to try and ask those questions that you feel too silly to ask sometimes,
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah,
you should
yeah.
already know. But yeah,
And was that hard to get onto the scholarship? Was that hard?
yes.
Was was it competitive?
I don't know exactly how many applicants they had that year, but most years, I believe that this year, for example, I think they've had about 35 applicants. 10 are shortlisted to interview, and the interview process is essentially an evening of drinks and talks the night before, getting to know the scholars who have just completed the year and some other
Okay.
SPAB members and staff. So that's your evening. And then the next day, it's an interview panel. I think there were 8 on my interview panel, and you had half an hour. And I remember they asked you to bring something to talk about, some examples of your work and if it was hands-on, etc. And I took way too much stuff and then was really worried because it didn't seem to get looked at. So I didn't think I'd got the scholarship.
I see.
But it's just half an hour is such a short period of time to talk to someone and to show and discuss your work as well. So I was convinced I hadn't got it. It was also interesting. The year I interviewed, I knew 6 of the 10 people interviewing. So
Oh,
yeah, so it's quite a small world we work in.
yeah, absolutely. Now, what was that like? Did you say it was a year? Yes.
Yeah, so technically it's 9 months, but
Okay.
so the first 6 months you spend traveling the country, learning traditional craft skills, visiting amazing historic sites, meeting lots of craftspeople and lots of other architects, engineers, building surveyors who are either SPAB scholars or not, or um, and so a week, for example, we'd be in Wales and we'd be with Nigel at Timauer, for example. We did a bit of pargeting with him, learning about his products and how he makes all of his products and how he sells them. The next day, we went to a Thatcher, Alan Jones, and we spent 2 days. In the evenings, he gave us lectures, and in the day, we did physically hands-on with we were actually using water reed on this building, but using the material. Um, and then the next day we met up with Andrew. That was 3 days. Next day was Andrew Faulkner, who's an architect in Wales, and he took us around some of his projects. And one of the buildings was on site, so we met the plasterer, and we spent the afternoon with the plasterer doing some plastering in the actual grade 1 listed cottage that the architect, that Andrew and the plasterer are working on. We camped on site. And then the last day in Wales, we were with a stonemason and we did a bit of dry stone walling. So that's kind of a week. It's very full on, very intense.
Yeah.
And you don't know where you'll be going. Depends on, there were times when we'd find out on Friday morning where we'd be Friday afternoon, and there were other times when we'd find out a week or two ahead where we'd be going. So it really was just kind of you just had to be flexible and ready to go. So I was with the two scholars my year as well were Amy Redman, who's also an architect. She now lives up in the Lake District, and Lucy Newport, who's a structural engineer and lives up in Sheffield. So the three of us were doing this together. We also travel around. There's a group of fellows who are craftspeople. So our year we had a carpenter, a timber framer, a joiner, and Tom, what does he do? Technically, his apprenticeship was in bell making, but he does more wet plastering trades now. Um, and when we say we go round with them, sometimes we're on site together, sometimes we're doing different things, but the idea is that we really share the knowledge. The type of questions that an architect or an engineer might ask are quite different to the type of questions that a timber framer or a carpenter might ask.
Mm.
So you're sort of learning from each other and questioning what you see, both in terms of its philosophy, how things are done, whether that's the right choice or not. And I think for me, one of the surprising things was I thought I was going to go around and see every project was amazing and be like, oh my word, like what have I been doing? And actually that's not the case. We saw some amazing examples, but we also saw some examples of work that were not how we would do things. And it makes you much more aware of what's going on in the world, and especially like across the country, because you usually work in a fairly small area, but to see it the whole of the country and where different areas may lack different skills or pieces of knowledge, or where the local authority are really trying to just push work to happen, that sometimes the quality might not be the same as in other areas
Yeah.
of the country. Um, and but yeah, it's an amazing. It's something that you can't until you've done it. You can't really understand the mindset of just you're full on all day, every day. And a lot of the time you stay with hosts. So in the evenings, you'll have done a whole day on site and then you'll go and stay with a different person. And then in the evenings over dinner and a glass of wine, you'll be discussing the in-depth philosophy of a certain
God, it's
project.
full on, isn't it? It's literally. So years and years and years ago, I went to one of the SPAB summer schools where they have guest speakers. It was over 2 or 3 days. It was down in Cirencester. And I just remember that being exhausting just over the 3 days, because the amount of information that you're taking in on board over that period is just exhausting, really, because you don't want to miss anything, do you? You
No,
think, oh,
no.
wait, I've got to remember that. You're constantly putting yourself under pressure because you're spending your time with an incredible craftsperson and you're trying to retain as much of that information as possible.
Yeah.
So that must have been absolutely exhausting for you.
Yeah, it was you're so privileged to get this experience that you need to
Yeah.
make the most of it. So we all kept sketchbooks, and I think I'm throughout the 9 months, I think I have something like 18 sketchbooks. And I still reference them all today. Sometimes if I was like, we looked at that project and there was a great mortar mix. What was in it? And I've got it all written down.
Oh,
Um,
amazing.
so that's brilliant. And you become so quick at writing notes and keeping sketches and drawing as well. So that's the first 6 months. And then the last 3 months, it settled us down a little bit. And you do something called the Plunkett section. And at this point, you choose a topic to study. So I was looking at the development of the English country house in relation to social change, but you can choose whatever topic you want to look at. And essentially, each week over the 3 months, you visit a different country house and stay, usually living in the country house with the family or whoever. And you
Mm.
spend your time drawing and researching. And so it's a bit of a different pace because you're setting your own pace at this point. And I was a bit skeptical about that because I live my life at 100 miles an hour and just go from literally living it at that pace to really calming down. But it's a real time to think. And that's where your drawing skills really develop, because drawing for 3 months all day, you become a lot better at it.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was, but I think it wasn't just about your topic. For me, I got a lot from understanding the types of people who look after these buildings and the challenges that they have, and being able to, as an architect, take that forward to understand when these people are struggling with these country houses, what those struggles are and how you can potentially help. And just even understanding the struggles of, do they work themselves or do they employ someone to look up, but then they'd have to employ someone to essentially look after the estate and manage the maintenance, or do they do that themselves and then they don't have another income source? So how do you get money from the estate? A lot of the properties, if they owned multiple properties, were in a poor condition because they've had lack of maintenance over the years. Um, and some people had not chosen this, they'd just inherited it, or other people had bought it and now we're looking at other options such as wedding venues or etc. So
Mm.
real variety, but and that all comes together as this 9 months that you travel the country and do all this. And everyone says, where do you live? On the road.
Yeah. And then did you have to set a final exam?
No, there's no examination. There's no need to even publish anything at the end. It's all for your own learning and for you moving forward in your career. And the main thing about it is that the scholarship has been running um for, well, since before the Second World War, so considerable amount of time. And it's all about sharing knowledge and sharing skills and ensuring that historic buildings continue to be maintained and looked after in a suitable way, and just educating the next generation essentially,
Mm.
which is amazing.
So that 9 months is, I would imagine, is completely changed your outlook. As if you hadn't done that course, the scholarship, you'd be working in a different way today, wouldn't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think, first of all, you become very aware of the SPAB philosophy through, obviously, a lot of the people you meet are previous scholars. So through that, but also just because that's what you are there. You're like the eyes and ears of the SPAB for a year, essentially. Um,
Mm.
and so, first of all, you become completely aware of that in what you're doing. Um, but I think one of the other things that I realized as well doing the scholarship is that I knew I had my own practice just before I started, but I thought I had wanted this 10-person practice and to work on the big shiny projects, etc. But one of the things I really became aware of was that what I enjoyed the most was sort of the high-end conservation work to really special places, but they didn't need to be the fancy Big Ben's Palace of Westminster kind of places. Actually, just small cottages and churches um, required the high level conservation and working directly with the craftspeople and having really good relationships with the people who are working on site and being able to have those
Mm.
conversations. So I decided after the scholarship that I was going to try and choose lifestyle and keeping the projects relatively small but able to control the details myself rather than growing and growing a big practice. Now, it's not to say won't ever employ anyone, but it's nice to be in a position where you can choose the projects you work on because there's not necessarily the bigger financial you need to pay people and etc.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, exactly. The thing is, there's so much to learn in this industry, isn't it? We never stop learning. So therefore, and that takes up quite a lot of time. And then if you have a team and you have to be an employer and have all that's a huge, that takes up a lot of time as well. So it's, yeah, absolutely get why you do it. And it's lovely. You can just manage, you can cherry pick and do what you want to do
yeah,
in some
yeah.
respects.
No,
Um,
completely. Like learning, as you say, it's never ending. Like every year I go to the Building Limes Forum, and every year you realize how little you know compared to
yeah,
all these other people
yeah.
out there. Um, and yeah, so I'm always attending, different CPDs and talks and people because I think the job as an architect and is, yes, I need to have a knowledge. I need to have a good amount of knowledge across a lot of materials, but the craftspeople using that material will always have a greater knowledge than I do of that material. But the more time I can spend with those people and working with those different materials, the more I'll learn, which will mean the next project, hopefully, will be better and completely, yeah. But I think that's one of the things as an architect, being that facilitator almost and having the awareness around you, but also not being, you've got to accept that other people do know more and to take that knowledge and advice, not being that person who thinks they know everything.
Oh, yeah. And that's interesting because there seems to be, with anything that, in any industry, but in our industry, there's quite a few egos flying around, I find. And there's not a lot of people that are willing to put their hand up and say, you know what, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you find that, but I find this a lot where they're trying desperately to impress a client, please a client, or they don't stop to think, hold on a minute, I don't know anything about this. I need to be able to find out. Do you find that with your work?
Yeah, I completely find that often that people aren't willing to say, to know the limit of their knowledge, but also
Yeah,
it's to not necessarily have the knowledge, just accept you can, that's the thing with the scholarship, that I now have this network of people and I won't necessarily know the question, the answer, but I might know someone who will know the answer.
yeah,
And so being willing to ask those people, but also I've had it where contractors, so for example, I might specify a certain lime mix and contractors will tell me they know how to use lime and or and then I'll have a conversation on site with them and they're not willing to accept my help in explaining how to mix it and doing the hot mixing with them because they should know it. They're a contractor, but
yeah,
it's not, that's not the case. Like I'm here to help as much as you're there to help and we can have these discussions. Like I'm working on a project at the moment, um and the contractors there have been really open to working with me, and I've done a training day and we've done some hot mixing together, and and we're literally talking through each of the items and how to resolve them together and have a really good relationship in that they're not afraid to ask me the questions and I'm not afraid to ask them. Their painters and decorators know way more about the different types of paint that should go here or go there. And you can Google things, but then they're like, no, we've had experience of that. It's not lasted that long. Why don't we try that? And I'm like, I don't know that product, but let's have a look at it. I can't see any
mm,
problems with it. Yeah, let's move forward with that kind of thing. And but we're both willing to accept we don't understand and that we both need to we need each other in order to get to the end of this project and it to be a success.
yeah, yeah. No, it's really important. So you went back to your practice and you said you had a few people waiting for you.
Yeah.
And now, how was that then? So after 9 months of intense studying, then you went straight into your practice and you obviously had work
Mhm.
to fall onto. So that was really lucky, wasn't it? Because you didn't have the insecurity of having to think, right, now I need to start from scratch and advertise. So that was really fortunate.
Yeah, actually it wasn't one of those things that wasn't planned. COVID didn't, we didn't have time to make plans when COVID hit. But
No.
um it worked out well in the end. There is always a sort of scholarship blues, as it were. When you finish because you've been going around a new place every day, meeting new people every day, and then suddenly it's, ah, I've got to actually like sit down at a computer and do some work rather than
Yeah.
just um being out and about having fun all the time. And I think so that was it was quite a struggle to get your head back into the right space. But at the same time, because this practice was still new, I was still excited about stuff. And I was excited to take into practice some of the things I had seen and been thinking about. Although I would say one of the things the scholarship does do, especially when you first finish, because you've been questioning everything everyone does over the entire 9 months, and you've been looking at everything so critically and so in line with, what is the real, how should you do this philosophically? What is the best way of doing it? When you come back into practice, you start questioning everything you're doing, every
Mm,
decision you're making. And it
You
takes
know
you a
too
while.
much now.
It's almost like the more you know, the more you
Yeah,
realize you don't know. And so you
exactly.
start questioning. Exactly, yeah. And so you're like, wait, I would have just written this this specification for whatever.
Yeah.
But now I'm sort of going, well, what if that happens? What if that happens? Could I consider this? Should we be taking off that much historic fabric? But there are, there's the straight line principles of what you should be doing, and then there's the reality. And you keep as close to the principles as possible, but there are times when, if a scaffolding's up, we might have to do a little bit more than you might want to if you didn't have the cost of a
Mm.
scaffolding, for example. Um, and so I think that's one of the things coming back in. It takes you a while to remember that you do have to actually just get the work done sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what was that like? Now you're really getting into running your own business now. It's not just about you being an architect, you're now actually running a business and you've got to be commercially aware and because you have to earn money. And what was that learning curve like?
Um, so I think different people are have different interests in the business side of stuff. I actually find it quite interesting and quite enjoy looking at the numbers and working out, how many hours have I actually spent on that, compared to what I thought it would take me.
Mm.
Looking at looking at if I'd have done it on a percentage basis, what would I have earned? Would it and all of those bits. But I was quite, I say, fortunate. I don't know, when I was in my part one placement in Marlow, they gave me a lot of responsibility. And at that point in time, I was already starting to write fee proposals. So that carried through into when I was working at Insoles, that I was putting together some of the fee proposals and the bids and tenders for projects. So I had a fairly good idea, which I don't
Ah, I
think a lot
see.
of people have. That I think I was very fortunate in that people had given me that experience of not just the architectural side, but of the business side of things and looking at the numbers, and managing your own time against those numbers. So yeah, so I think, but I think the bit you have to get your head around as well is all the VAT when you become VAT registered and the
Yeah,
accounting, um, and it's those little bits that do take longer than you realize, um, in a day, and taking that into consideration when you're looking at your costs, because otherwise you'd probably be a day a week short on what you're trying to.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And out of interest, how do obviously architects maybe work in different ways, but how generally does the being an architect and pricing for work? You said you can do things on a percentage, or do you do things on hourly rates, day rates? And then how does what does it look like when you're pitching for some work?
So, it depends how the projects come to you, whether you're tendering for the project or whether you are just putting together a fee proposal for the client.
Okay.
Um, I do occasionally do a competitive tender. There's a project I'm working on, Great Missenden Church, where we're doing an extension to the church. So that's a large project. There were 10 architects invited to tender for the project, essentially. So that one is slightly different, but I try and avoid those kind of, just because though it's the amount you're actually going to win of those, unless I thought I had a good chance of winning. It's a lot of time to put together a whole tender with all of
Oh, it's
your.
huge time,
Yeah,
isn't it?
exactly. And so for me, as someone who's working on their own, that time isn't necessarily best spent unless I thought I had a good chance of winning those type of projects. So usually I'll just be working on a fee proposal. I Some people start working on a percentage from quite early on. I don't, and I don't start working on a percentage until the project reaches site, and that's mainly because, in historic buildings, you don't necessarily know the extent of the work until you've got through the development of the specifications of the items and working out
Yeah,
what repairs are needed. Um, it's all very well saying this is the client's budget, but actually, in working with existing buildings, especially when you're doing repair works, you're not really going to be able to value engineer the works. The works needs doing or it doesn't, and there's a cost associated with that. And so until you've got further down the project, you might not know what the budget is. So I'll put together a fee proposal, looking at what number of hours I think things will take me, and then I'll either work on an hourly rate or based on my fee proposal that I've quoted. And then once I get onto site, if I'm working as contract admin, I'll go into a percentage-based fee.
Okay.
But it varies project to project, and how people want to work. And that
So with the proposal fee, you have to make sure that you've got that figure right.
Yes, although what I tend, again, different people do at different stages. I will only do the fee for each stage at one time. So, for example, if you came to me and you said you had a listed house and you wanted to extend it, alter it in some way, I would say, right, first stage is we're going to do a feasibility study. So the fee for the feasibility study is X.
Oh, okay.
Um, and then once we've discussed the feasibility study, we have a bit more of an understanding of what the client's brief is, what the design is going to be. So then I can put together the next stage of the fee proposal. And then once it gets onto site, it moves to the percentage. But that first of all, I think briefs change so much. So sometimes it's hard to put a price on at the beginning. And again, there will be some architect practices who do, but in order to be fair to all people, because so for example, a client came to me a few years back and their brief is they told me that the clients, what they often come to you, and rather than giving you a brief, they tell you what they want. And that's when you have to take them back a step. So
Mm.
what their brief actually was is that they wanted a 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. What they told me they needed was an extension to achieve this.
Right.
So if I'd have put together a fee proposal based on the fact that they needed an extension, it would have been a lot higher. But the reality was, once I'd done the feasibility study and explained to them how they could rearrange the building and make it work for them with it essentially one dormer window, otherwise being minimal extension works. Um, they were over the moon that I'd basically resolved their problem without them having to extend. Um, but that's where your fee proposal wouldn't have worked if you'd have based it on what they said that they wanted than the
Yeah.
reality of what was actually needed. Um,
Uh, I see. And then with the percentage, is that percentage of the whole project cost?
yes, so
That's
I'd
how
be
it
on a
works.
of the whole construction cost. I'd be on a
Yes.
percentage of the construction cost. Yeah,
I see.
yeah.
So if they change it, then that will, yeah, I see.
Yeah, because at that
Interesting
stage the
that.
costs are being at that stage you've got costs, so you've got accurate costs, so the costs are being managed. Um, yeah,
And obviously, with all types of projects, some you do better at, and others you don't, depending on what happens
yeah.
really.
It depends if there's a problem that comes up or not, and how much time a project takes. And it's always that difficult one because you're there to try and do what's best for the building, but the client has a budget at the end of the day. And so
Right.
sometimes, you do have to spend a bit more time looking at something because often the more expensive option is the easier one for you to resolve. It's trying to be creative,
Mm.
spend less that can, yeah, take more time. Like if you're repairing, it'd be much easier to replace a lot of the roof structures I work on than repair them. It takes much longer to go through each timber by timber, working out what repairs are required compared to just a new roof.
Of course. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So work seemed to be, it sounds like it came in quite nicely. And was that referral? Did you have to advertise to make sure you kept busy? How did that work?
I I've never advertised beyond having a website, which I'm going to be quite honest with you, I haven't updated since I started, which needs to be
Yeah.
done, and that's a task for when I have a spare couple of days.
Yeah, you and
Um,
me both. I need to do mine as well.
but it's so hard. Like you need to update your website, but at the same time, when you're busy, it's at the bottom of the to-do
Oh,
list.
of course. It can, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
So yeah, no, everything's been essentially word of mouth because I do a lot of work with churches. Um, you work on one church, and then that church talks to the neighboring church, who talks to
Yeah.
the diocese, and then by the time you're working with the diocese, because you've put in some applications, and then the diocese start recommending you. And so church work comes through quite fluid. It's interesting. I can say to you, you can never tell where your next project's coming from. The last not last church, a church I was recently appointed on. Um, I met a guy at a wedding. He was like, "Oh, what do you do?" And I said, "I'm a conservation architect." And the next day, his mum phoned me up and said that she was church warden for a church, and they were looking for an architect. So you're always networking, no matter where you
Yeah,
are.
yeah. That's amazing. So you were named in the King's Foundation 35 under 35, which is a hugely prestigious honour. So can you tell us a little about what that is to our audience?
Yeah, essentially it's 35 people under the age of 35 who are what the king wants to see the future of the country and how and what he wants to advocate for. So the group of people is made up of fashion designers, farmers, potters, um, all different craft people. I think there's one other architect who works on robotics, so something completely different to what I work on. But again, he's
Yeah.
looking at zero carbon and sustainability, and I'm working in conservation. So it's this group of incredible 35 people, and we've visited. So we had a launch party at the Garrison Chapel. And then we've been to Highgrove, we've been to Dumfries House, looking at what the King's Foundation does and networking with each other. And then we had an event up in London a couple of weeks ago where they brought in some mentors. Princess Eugenie was there and a few other names. We met the King up at Dumfries House a couple of months back. And it was amazing to talk to him about what you do and how engaged he was with every single person.
Ah,
Um,
lovely.
which was, yeah, you just it's a hard thing to find common ground with so many people, but he did. And yeah, so that was really great. And we've got a few more events and different things coming up. But the idea is that essentially we're advocates for the King's Foundation and how the King wants to see the future of the country, and yeah, what good work people can be doing out there. And it's inspiring. So all the other people are so inspiring. There's sort of a lady who knits up in the Fair Isle using sort of this the technique that she uses, but using all her own wool. She's got her own sheep, etc. There's a lady who makes handmade brushes in Wales. Yeah, absolutely inspiring what these people do. And everyone's got a different story and journey of how they got to where they got to.
And how was everybody selected then? What was the selection process?
Um, I don't know the exact process, but I believe hundreds of people applied. They said they had hundreds and hundreds of applications. Um, and then they looked at everyone and selected
Ah, I
35
see.
peoples. So yeah, it was a relatively, I say, you just had to sort of put in what you do and some examples of your work, and explain this, and then they selected the people. So
And had you have had any other involvement with the King's Foundation prior to this?
no, none at all. I obviously knew the King's Foundation. They run a similar so obviously the SPAB runs the scholarship and the fellowship, and they run a similar program for craftspeople, not for the scholars, just for the craftspeople. So I knew a few people who were Prince's Trust fellows essentially when it was the Prince's
Mm.
Trust. But beyond that, I hadn't had any. I didn't realise the extent of the work that the King's Foundation do when we were up at Dumfries House learning. Like they've got the craft workshops, but they've also got like a cottage garden where they grow stuff. So they have courses on growing, then they have the courses on cooking, and then they have all the way through to hospitality itself, and um, actually training up waiters, waitresses, and everyone across the board, and creating all these links between different sectors in that, which is really interesting.
And what else are they doing in the conservation world for heritage buildings?
Well, I guess Dumfries House itself was the King's done a fair amount of work there as a building, but essentially they run summer schools for craftspeople, and their focus is largely on the craftspeople and making sure the crafts themselves don't die out, and making sure there's training programs for craftspeople in building
Mm.
conservation, is what they sort of advocate for.
You're really keen and passionate about encouraging new talent into the industry. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I guess for me, whilst I was at university, I was never introduced to SPAB or conservation really. Like as I said, in my master's I looked at vernacular materials, but not necessarily as a conservation method, just as the materials and how we could use them in modern construction. But we never covered much on existing buildings, and how they are built differently to modern construction. And so, one of the things that worries me is that we live in the UK, which has a considerable number of houses which are of solid wall construction. If you think about the Victorians and everything before that. So, we're
Mm.
not just talking about listed buildings, we are just talking about anything that's kind of built of solid wall construction or timber frame construction. And there's a real lack of understanding about how to look after these buildings and how, as an architect, you should be altering or working with the buildings. And I believe that we should be including everyone in conservation education so we can look after the buildings properly, because the more people, the more professionals that understand, the more builders that understand, the more people that have this understanding, the more buildings which are going to be treated correctly. And so if we can encourage younger people who are still in their early stages of training, to engage with existing buildings, then the buildings themselves have a much better chance. So and I think it's still, unfortunately, one of these things that we live in a world that conservation is sort of seen as the older white man kind of sector, but it shouldn't be.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
it's there for everyone. It's everyone's heritage. Um, and so everyone should be part of looking after it. So yeah, so I set up with, so Catherine Ball, who works for the SPAB, um, and myself worked with Birmingham City University to set up a program for people from, for their students from low income backgrounds or ethnic diverse backgrounds. And we ran a 2-day workshop as a trial to start, um, with a hands-on surveying task, and then looking at repairs and potential adaptations and alterations of an existing building that the university had on their site. And it went
Mm.
down really well. I did 3 years of the program, and now other scholars who have finished the scholarship since I finished have taken over to continue running that with the SPAB. And I think it's been the start of these courses popping up, and they're now being run at sort of 3 or 4 universities. And I think that that's brilliant. That's introducing history, and it's not complex. We're not talking about the in-depth lime specification. We're just talking about understanding what a historic building is and what to look out for. Um, but these courses have been quite a success, and a number of people since the courses have been so engaged that they've started to look at pursuing careers in conservation, which
Oh,
is brilliant.
amazing.
Yeah.
How hard was it to set the course up in the first place?
Well, I'm going to be honest. I did my part three at Birmingham City University, so already had some contacts at the university.
Mm.
Um, and Catherine Bull is brilliant. She basically organises the SPAB Scholarship, so I was able to connect the right dots together. And then Catherine and Katrina, who is from Birmingham University, sort of got together to organise the dates, and then we all three of us had a few Zoom meetings to put together the programme. And then I sort of on the day run a number of the lectures and yeah, the course basically. So
Amazing. And
yeah,
it's really encouraging that there's evidence there that people are taking up off the back of that course.
yeah, exactly. That's one of the things when I first started becoming interested in historic buildings, I joined a couple of groups. And a lot of the groups are retired people who are interested in history of buildings or conservation. But the SPAB, because not just because of the scholarship, but because of some of the working parties they run and because of some of the courses they run, actually have a much younger network of people, um, which is great. And so you start to feel like you're not such the outsider, and become much more involved, and go to some of the events that they run, such as the working parties and different things. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Fantastic. I'd love to one day, when I'm not so busy, try to get into some form of training. It's one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast, is because this is an education for people. And who knows, somebody might be listening who are umming and ahhing what they want to do in their life and go, oh, that sounds like an interesting option there for me. So it's definitely something I'd love to be involved in, but I don't do it now because I just don't have that time to put into it.
Yeah.
It sounds quite sort of time consuming,
Yeah,
and
no,
it's
it is. And I'm on the education and training committee of the SPAB as well. So trying to work with them. Um, and I teach on some of the bespoke courses now as well. And I think the more time you spend teaching, the more rewarding it is. And
oh yeah,
yeah, it is really rewarding. When I was actually, this is a few years ago, when I was still living up in Birmingham, and I was working with the uni when I was at Donald Insall Associates, I was working with the university. It was sort of a collaboration project between the Birmingham City University and Donald Insall Associates. Um, and they were actually working on real life projects. It was my real life project that was their brief. And actually one of the girls came up to me and said that she was so inspired by it and by me, etc., that she had enrolled on a master's at Oxford Brookes in building conservation. Um, and I didn't know that she had done that, and I didn't know the story until it turned out my brother and her brother were friends, and she had told her brother that she'd met this girl and that she was going to now do building conservation. Anyway, small world, and it all came back to me, and then obviously we met in real life. But yeah, it's that kind of thing where you don't realize what you're doing, and then how rewarding it is that someone has seen what you're doing and wants to do something similar.
yeah, and I also believe that we're meant to cross paths with certain individuals as well, because there's too many chance meetings for me in my life. You think now sliding doors moment, isn't it? It's just strange how some things work out.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, really is. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Can we talk a bit about the women in conservation and what, where are we with this? I would imagine that in the architect's practice, it's probably a bit healthier than a joinery workshop, I would imagine. What are your views on this and your thoughts?
Yeah, I think what's interesting, and I was in an education and training meeting recently, and it was being because the SPAB have just run a really great Women in Conservation event, and we were discussing women in conservation, and I think there does appear to be more women in the crafts side working in the conservation sector compared to working in the general building industry sector. There's a number of women bricklayers, plasterers, quite a few conservators, a couple of stonemasons, and there are women coming through. And I think for me, the more people see women in that position, if you're a young girl coming up and through, the more you see women doing these kind of crafts, the more you'll think that that is something that is open to you. Um, and so I think yeah, it's getting better, but there's still a lack. However, when you look at I say the professional side, when you look at the architects and engineers and building surveyors, I think that there are considerably more women coming through than there are in the craft side. Even
Mm.
for example, our scholarship year, we were three females. Um, and that's quite unusual. I think it might have been the first year that we had all three being female.
Yeah.
One engineer. Don't get me wrong, there's been lots of other years now since then where there's lots of females. But I think it's definitely becoming more normal and more widely accepted. Like when I go on a building site, I don't quite feel the everyone staring at you. Don't get me wrong, there's been times and comments, etc., but that's just the building industry. I don't think it
Yeah.
matters if you're male or female. An architect coming onto site is sometimes different people have views on that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't matter who
Yeah.
you are, they're going to take a dislike to you.
Especially if you're wearing a suit, and then you've had it.
Yeah, no, don't wear a suit to site. But no, like there have been times where probably because, and I don't, you never know what the reason is. Is it because I'm just an architect? Is it because I'm female? Is it because I'm relatively young? Then what these comments. But one of the things I've just done is always just keep my head down and keep going. And people, if you can show that you know what you're doing and you respect them, they'll respect you.
Mm.
And most of the builders I've worked with, generally at the end of it, have we've all come away really happy, and they've been thankful for me, and I've been thankful for them, and we've had a good relationship. So
Mm.
there'll always be the difficult projects because that's the world we work in, where money's involved. So it always gets difficult.
It would be, things have changed. They've definitely improved. When I left school, if one of the girls in my class was training to be a joiner, it would have been, this should have been an alien, literally. What do you mean? So it would have been unheard of,
Yeah,
really seriously unheard of. So thank goodness that's different now. But there's still, and these things take time, don't they? But there's still a real need for more women on construction sites, because it will be a much, much better place overall to have that mix.
yeah,
Because it's no different if it was all women on construction sites and no men. It's really healthy to have that mix, because men bring a certain skill and ability, and women bring a certain skill and ability, and the two blended together are just absolutely perfect. The good thing, it's happening, but seems to be quite, not, I'm not talking about the architects, but the craft world. There seems to be quite a slow uptake. Now, I don't know whether that's because more women are less interested. I don't know if or it's just because they feel that industry is not for them, or they're not welcome. I'm
yeah.
not sure.
Interesting. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And what those barriers are. But even when I was talking to, so I'd say that there's most women in architecture, and there are women engineers in conservation, but not loads. And when I was talking to Lucy, who's an engineer who did the scholarship my year, she did say one of the things was that there was only really one other female conservation engineer to talk to and look up to, and she had seen her do a few talks and things. And I
Mm,
think it is just about seeing those people in those positions and doing those things. Like if you think
okay.
about often when you walk past a building site, it is quite male dominated. So as a female,
Yeah,
it would be intimidating to then get into that environment.
absolutely. Yeah.
But if you saw that as a mix, so it's going to take the time coming through. But what's interesting is you say the mix is important. One of the fellows my year, who's a timber framer, he works with a female timber framer who he says is absolutely brilliant. And the difference
Mm,
is she can't lift the same weight that he can lift, but that means she has to be clever in how she thinks about doing things. And he was
yeah.
like, sometimes she's just so she's worked everything out before the men because she's got to, because she can't physically just lump it on her shoulder and chuck it up. So she's already worked out how she's going to do something in a different way. And I think it's
Yeah.
sometimes like that's where it's important to have the different skills together, because the working together they can create a much better project.
Oh, completely. It would be much, much better. And just the general conversation on site, which is improve.
Yeah.
Really, it just really would improve. And one of the best employees I ever had was a young girl, Heather. She might even listen to this podcast. And when she came on, I think she was maybe 19, I think, when she joined me. And
Yeah.
she was phenomenal, absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
So I think you're right in the fact that it could just it certainly would be intimidating, if you're going onto site and it's just predominantly men. So we've got to change that, and just somehow we've just got to keep on picking away at that, haven't we? To encourage more people. The more we get, the better it will become. And they should have some sort of, why couldn't they have some sort of programs where it's encouraging women only on certain applications? I know that would be judgmental, understand, but we got to have something where we could have something like that. So we build the numbers up, and then it's just more attractive.
Yeah. But I'd say just generally we need more young people coming into the crafts. Doesn't
We do,
matter,
yeah.
they're both male and female. And
Oh,
so
absolutely.
many of the craft courses have closed, aren't happening anymore, or people, and there's just those lack of courses. And even making so when I was at school, I went to a grammar school. I was very much pushed to go to university, and if you had the grades, Oxford and Cambridge, well, only Cambridge do architecture, so I was pushed to apply to Cambridge, and not push, but that was the sort of direction they were wanting you to head in. But even coming into schools earlier and saying, look, these craft skills, you don't have to go to university and to get a degree
Yeah.
to do a really good job.
Mm.
So bringing even that in earlier, and at that stage, I would say that gender is almost neutral. When you're at school, it's not, it's not so you can advertise the craft to both genders without it seeming, one or the other.
Yeah.
Um, Whereas, yeah, and so I think it's maybe, yeah, improving what's available and the way schools push students to move forward as well.
Oh,
Um,
that's absolutely, isn't it? It's got it will start with schools, parents and schools, really.
yeah,
That's it. Um, yeah, interesting. We'll see how that pans out. Um, let's discuss some of your highlights or some challenges that you've had
yeah.
in the time that you've done it. Yeah, it can be either some highlights or some things that didn't go quite well. It doesn't have to be your fault or somebody else's fault, whatever it might be, just something that's interesting that, yeah, was, yeah, let's go for that.
Let's have a think.
Let's have a think. Everybody says that. Let me just have a think.
Yeah, I know which ones. Well, highlights is fairly. I've worked on some really lovely projects, and for me, church work is. It's a privilege to be able to work on these buildings that are hundreds of years old. And medieval fabric is really where my heart's at, because it's that's still standing from all those hundreds of years ago. Someone literally made it by that. They didn't have machines back then, that was literally
Yeah.
handmade. And I'm now part of that journey for that building. Um, and so for me, working on those type of buildings is a real privilege. Um, we a couple of years ago did some work to St James's Church in Aylesbury. And we replaced the tower roof, and it had an incredible amount of graffiti on that lead. It was a lead tower roof. Had an incredible amount of graffiti on it. And for me, it was a really difficult decision to re-roof the tower. The water was literally pouring through it. So it
Mm.
needed doing. But that lead up there was hundreds of years old, and had the marks of so many people who had visited the church on it. We found graffiti of ships, people's hands, feet, all sorts were
Oh,
up
how
there.
incredible.
It was, yeah, beautiful to see. And actually, one of the pieces of graffiti that we found in it was a commemoration to Queen Victoria's Jubilee. And we actually found this at the same time as Queen Elizabeth II's Jubilee, just before she died. So the church sent a letter to the Queen, and just before she died, she sent a letter back saying how
Oh,
wonderful it was
amazing.
that we'd told her. So that kind of, so that was a real. We did end up replacing the lead on the roof. We actually cut out some of the most significant pieces of graffiti and we clipped them back onto the roof once the work was finished, because I believe, don't get me wrong, we photographed it and it was documented by a specialist, etc. It wasn't just
Yeah.
got rid of immediately. But I very much believe anything can go in the archives, but until it's on the fabric itself, you don't know it's safe, because the building fabric is, someone's got to physically take that away, whereas it's very easy to lose a piece of paper or a document on an online storage system or something.
Mm.
And so, yeah, so I felt very strongly that we were to put back at least the most significant pieces, and we inscribed on the back that they had been cut out of the previous roof when the re-roofing was done in 2023. So that was an interesting that was a highlight. That project wasn't without its problems.
Mm.
Because so once we took off the roof, we discovered that the wall plates, which appeared, we could see them from the bell chamber and appeared generally okay. We'd put a few repairs in, but the backs of them had completely rotted out. They weren't even structurally sound. The structural engineer didn't even know really what the roof was sat on before. No wonder it was in such a poor state. So that took a little bit of time and looking at monies and everything to try and reinstate. Well, we had to put back new oak wall plates up there. So I say a challenge. That's kind of the general challenges that come up. I say come up on most projects. It's always something slightly different, but something that, next time I do a project looking at that, I'll know to leave probably a larger provisional sum for
Yeah.
wall plates, because, they looked okay. And then when you took the roof off and you look behind them, but what we've hopefully done is we've put them back, but we've put a couple of slate packers under them, so they should now have airflow, because that was one of the reasons that obviously the problems had occurred. So yeah, that was an interesting project. What other challenges, highlights?
I would imagine a lot of your challenges are actually people rather than the buildings.
Yeah, people can definitely be a challenge. I think that it depends. Like when you're working on a church, I'd say the PCC generally, because it's a group, will come to a decision based on what the architect suggests. So it's in a way
Okay.
easier because you're there and seen as the person who's helping guide them.
Yeah.
However, when you're working on a private project, um, definitely you can feel like a marriage counselor between husband and wife.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and when things are going, I say not wrong, but aren't going quite as smoothly as everyone was hoping, and the timescales are increasing,
Yep.
you do carry a lot of weight on your shoulder as the architect, particularly when it's a private person's project, because you know that at the end of the day they've got to find the money.
Mm.
And it is their responsibility. Like when you're working with a church or a group, it's less burden for those people. They're sharing that.
Mm.
So yeah, that can be a challenge. And then when the contractors are losing money and they can keep adding costs, and you kind of there just batting them down saying no because it's not in the contract, they've already agreed to those costs, etc.
It must be hard to maintain relationships sometimes because it's so difficult. You've got to wear multiple hats, haven't you?
Yeah.
Because you're a decision maker, but also you're client facing. You have to maintain relationships to make the whole project flow.
Yeah.
However, you can't be a pushover if a contractor's trying to squeeze a bit more money out of the job.
Yeah.
And then if you then have a slightly uncomfortable conversation with that individual, all of a sudden for the rest of that project, it could be a little bit sour. So it must be
Oh,
so difficult.
yeah, no, it really is. And for me, I just keep everything professional. It never let things become personal. And don't get me
Yeah.
wrong, there's been occasions when people have tried to make it personal and you just have to step above that. And
Mm.
but no, it can be really because at the same time you need the client or the contractor to know what's going on, but you don't want them to worry because you know there is a solution, you just haven't reached it yet sometimes. And
Yeah.
so it can be quite pressurized in being the sort of person taking on all of the information and taking on everyone's burdens to then calm the whole situation down. Um, so yeah, it can be difficult. But as I say, generally, if you can just keep it keep it professional, and be polite and try and it's the best way to get through it. Um, no, it's
That's a learning curve there straight away.
yeah.
Constantly learning. There's things that I do now that I definitely would have been doing differently sort of 10, 15 years ago. And you just learn, constantly learning. And you think, oh, why did I say that? And
Oh yeah.
you
Also,
know,
answering emails. When I first set up, I was super
yeah,
keen and would be like
yeah.
straight on the emails back to someone. And then the problem is that they expect you to get back to them immediately.
Mm, mm,
And also setting boundaries that just because, you have your own practice, there will be times when I'm working at 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night. But turn off my emails because I shouldn't be expected to respond at that point in time. And I think that
yeah,
took me a while to try and put in place my own boundaries.
yeah,
Um, and I think, yeah, so that definitely took. And one thing, another learning curve is when I first set up, a couple of architects who I've known for a very long time, they've sort of had their practices and retired, um, said to me was, um, if it feels wrong, stop, don't do the project. If it's feeling wrong before you've even started,
yeah, absolutely.
it's gonna be, it's already problematic.
Yeah,
Um, And so why would you want to become involved any more in that project? And there was a project recently, which could have been a really lovely project. Um, but something told me that it was also going to be a project that I'd regret because it was going to be difficult. Um, the client already was having their own ideas and not necessarily listening to me.
right.
So I sometimes question what's the point of employing an architect if you're not going to listen to them? Just employ someone to draw up your drawings as a CAD technician.
Yeah,
Um, you're employing me on a listed building because of my knowledge and skills. And so I actually, turned down. I was quite far into potentially working on that project and ended up turning it down. Um, and I think it was the right. Don't get me wrong. You sometimes go, oh, that could have been, it could have been such an incredible project, but also there was just a gut feeling that something was going to go wrong about
yeah.
it.
And there must have been a weight off your shoulders. And that's a good sign as well. When the
Yeah,
weight comes off and you say, oh, okay, that's fine. That was the right
yeah.
decision.
That was exactly it. I thought it hasn't even started yet,
Yeah.
and I'm already concerned. And so no, it wasn't the right project for me. And I think that's taken time to understand that feeling and when you just because something looks and sounds amazing, is it worth? Because as I keep going back, I chose the practice and this way of life after the scholarship because of lifestyle,
Mm,
and to work on really lovely projects with really lovely people. Um, and so just trying to come back to what I do and why I do it,
mm.
really, and making it, yeah.
So on that subject then, what is the future for Liberty Rose Architects? What do you have a really clear vision where you want to go, where you want to be in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time? Do you wax and wane from month to month?
I don't necessarily have a clear vision. It does vary depending when you work on something, you're like, oh, I want to do more of this. And then you're like, oh no, now I don't. um,
Yeah.
but generally, I really like the church work and the ecclesiastical work. And so I will always do that. And I would like that, but I say the problem, it's not necessarily the biggest fee earning work, church work. It's
Mm.
more of a
Yeah.
passion. And it's very slow progressing. Like there's projects that 5 years ago when I, started the practice, we're still discussing the same things in circles.
Yeah.
Uh,
Frustrating.
yeah. So I still also need essentially private work alongside that. And I work as a consultant for a couple of other architect practices, and I really enjoy that work because it allows me to work on larger projects, but actually just be doing the bit I want, which is the conservation. So even if it's a
Mm,
larger scheme, or it I still can come back to the core of what I want to do, which is high level conservation. Um, but just with other having that team around. So for me, I would like to push that a little bit more. I still work on people's listed buildings, and I think I always will, but that's the project work that can be quite time consuming depending on who the client is. And so
mm,
don't get me wrong, there are bits that are really rewarding, but that's quite hit and miss. So I think, yeah, for me, I would like at this stage to sort of maybe increase the amount of consulting work that I do with other architects. Is how I see the practice going, um, rather than growing the practice itself, being able to team up and be part of a team, providing what I do best, my knowledge in conservation and materials.
mm. So you think you'll just stay with you for now, as in the practice?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
But no, I
interesting.
think that's for me, that's where part of me would really like to train people up, but I don't feel that it would be um like the money side of things doesn't work. If you're just one architect to one, I would have to spend so much time training a part one or part two because what I work on is so much. You need the knowledge. I don't work on many things where there's a couple of CAD drawings to do. Most of what I'm doing
Mm,
is spec writing. And if I am doing design work, it's so heavily, if I am doing an extension, for example, it's so heavily involved in understanding the existing building, that until I was probably a 2 or 3 person team, it wouldn't be beneficial to bring on someone and train them. So yeah, I think that would be something I'd like to do, but I don't think financially it makes sense at the moment.
no, exactly that. And where would you recommend for some of our listeners who are interested in becoming a conservation architect or just generally getting involved in the heritage buildings industry? What would you suggest to them? Books or organizations, websites, training? I know obviously SPAB is a big one, but what would you
Yeah.
recommend?
Well, first of all, go on the SPAB working parties because they are weekends or weeks, depending on what size. They do regional ones and larger national working parties where specialist craftspeople essentially will be teaching you, but it's also very informal. We have campfires and barbecues and singing and dancing, but all those conversations of that in between where you're not formally doing something and formally learning, but you're speaking with someone else is a really good learning curve. So definitely go to SPAB working parties. I would say that the Historic England do some really great lectures and technical Tuesdays. Their series called Practical Building Conservation, it's a series of books, are a really great foundation for your knowledge. I think they must be updating some of them soon, but I think it's 12 books or something. Don't get me wrong, they are fairly expensive, but they provide all the basics of what you need to know, and they work really well as reference books. Um, and I would also, uh, in terms of other training, other learning, to be honest, there's nothing like going around and sitting and drawing, and the amount you learn through drawing existing buildings.
Mm,
And that's part of what we did on the scholarship. And you can do that in your own time, just by looking. Well, why has that window got that detail over the top of it? What's that detail doing? How's that wall being supported? What's that? What style of roof is that? That's a bit of a strange detail. Why have they done that? Um, and I think being able to just take things in and use your eyes to analyze something, there's a
mm,
lot to be said for that. And I feel that maybe that's something at universities they don't do enough. Just let people have their own time to explore something. Um, because it's that, what do they call it? Self-taught learning. Yeah.
Yeah, and also they don't really encourage youngsters just to phone companies up and say, it would be great if I could just literally come along for one day, hang out. I don't want to be paid for it, but I just want to come up and to see what you're up to. Because a lot of youngsters don't understand is that employers are looking for that somebody who's proactive, who is willing to learn, who's willing to say, I'll come up for a day. I don't want to be paid. I won't get in your way. I'm just really interested to take notes. That will go a hell of a long way for when that individual has qualified and building their network.
Yeah.
And I'd be recommending people to just do that. Find a company that you really like and just say, can I come up and just have a look? Or just come chat with you for half an hour, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. Like there's a number of people have put people in contact with me and I've just given them a chat on the phone for, half an hour or gone for a coffee with them and just sort of said, have you considered this? How have you considered that?
Mm.
And also, like, there are days when, don't get me wrong, I can't employ people or anything, but there are definitely opportunities where, if you're doing a quinquennial inspection for a day, they're not going to necessarily be able to be too helpful, but so I wouldn't be able to pay them. But if they just wanted to come and be a sort of eye having a look, what you're doing, what on
Yeah.
earth are you actually doing?
Yeah.
Why are you doing that?
Mm.
Yeah. I think, yeah. And nowadays with the internet, there are so many there's so many ways of finding out who, see a nice piece of, building work being done and you think, oh, who was the architect? You go on the planning portal, you can Google it, you can see on Instagram. There are so many ways to find out who people are. Uh,
Yes. Oh, yeah. So much easier now.
yeah.
Really, it couldn't be easier to get in touch with people. And do you any social media work, or obviously we have your website, but do you do anything with LinkedIn or Instagram, or because you have
Yeah,
loads of time? Oh, you
I
do?
have all the time. I do have my Instagram. It's probably the thing I keep most up to date. And I say up to date, it makes it one of the things the King's Foundation, I say all of them, not all of them, but most of the 35 under 35 have like, I say 50 to 200,000 followers. And there's me. I barely have any.
Yeah.
But they post all the time. And I think that's one thing I'm terrible at because I'm like, oh, no one will be interested in this old building. And everyone else is like, yeah,
I
but
know.
everyone is interested.
I
Um,
know.
so I
I'm the
do need to
same.
be better at it. But no, my Instagram, I definitely is probably what I keep most up to date. Um, and I go through phases. You go through phases, don't you, of remembering to do stuff and then it drops off for a bit and then you have something exciting coming up. So
Yeah.
post a bit about that. Like we've just been shortlisted for the King of Prussia Gold Medal, so for one of our projects. So that was quite an exciting thing. We've, post about that, and then you forget for a while.
Amazing.
But yeah,
Fantastic. Wonderful. We'll put the links, your website and your Instagram on the show notes. So thank you so much, Libby, for joining us today and sharing your expertise and insights. And it's just been absolutely fascinating to hear about your journey and your work. It's been wonderful. So yeah, I just want to say thank you. When I'm in your neck of the woods, I'll be knocking on your door and scrounging a cup of tea one day. But yeah, until then, it's been a pleasure and thank you very much.
thank you for having me. It's been great talking to you. And yeah, anytime, pop in, come and have a cup of tea.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you very much and bye for now.
Bye.